Religion, Society, Culture podcast presented by Dr. Willa J. Keaton, episode 1, season 1. I want to start this podcast off with one question. What kind of society will we leave our children and our grandchildren? And so when you ask that question, I think what you will end up with is this understanding that what needs to take place is a redefinition of what is the society we're striving to be. But first, you have to dig into the closet and say, what kind of society do we have? So where do we start? Where do we start the makeover? If the forefathers called coming to America and establishing the Constitution, Bill of Rights, if they call that the grand experiment, and if we are at a place, crossroads, and a redefinition of society is necessary, where do we start the makeover? As a culture, we love makeovers, and if, where do we start? What will the before and after pictures of the makeover look like? But you can't help but come to a conclusion that we're in a desperate need of a makeover. And if you haven't come to that conclusion, then you probably are a cold-hearted person. Because what I'm talking about in terms of the measuring stick is the amount of suffering that's going on right in front of us. The homelessness, the amount of prisoners, the amount of overdoses, the amount of tent cities. And it's becoming harder and harder to turn away. So we are at a turning point. However, we seem to be, for the most part, in denial. Those who have the power are those who care the least. But the turning point we see is the demand. However, the passion we have for change, we're stuck in neutral. The will to see the change, embody the change, and be the change, there's not enough passion to make that happen. So breaking down religion, society, culture, we begin to think about strengthening each pillar, the three pillars. The fourth, for now, is the pillar dedicated to the unnamed virtue. But how is our society? If you put together some type of diagnostic tool, we begin to think about, can the strength of our society be measured by the pillars? And so we rebuild the pillars of our society. So one of the things I've noticed, and one of the things I've been saying a lot recently is a society is as only strong as the institutions within it. So we rebuild the pillars of our society: education, science, philosophy, all now nurtured in love, and putting our brother, our neighbor above ourselves. We become our brother's keeper like we were meant to be. And speaking of our brother's keeper, the Garden of Eden, the serpent. How does the serpent and the understanding and the reality that the serpent exists, how does that fit into the religion, society, and culture? You know, what part does the curse play in the turnaround? If you want to lean in a biblical way, we can go there. You see, in the Garden of Eden, there's all three. So there's all three dimensions. There's religion, there's a society, and there's culture. Think about it. So we look into the Bible and we look into um, Greco-Roman culture, philosophy, and the understanding of the pillars and how important the pillars are. In Islam, they talk about the 5 pillars of Islam. And so strengthening the pillars allows you to stay on your deen. The temple, made up of pillars, you know, has to be strong because that's where the worship of Allah, that's where the worship of Christ, right? So Christ comes in and says, listen, you've turned my father's house into a den of thieves. Well, how do you know? Well, you can probably see that the pillars of the temple are weakened and the father's house has always been a house of prayer. And no, it's no longer a house of prayer, it's become a marketplace. So why religion, society, cultures? Pillars have always been a representation, has always been an understanding. And so I think that our reality exists in the pillars of religion, the pillars of culture, the pillars of our society, how we treat each other is a good starting place for thinking about the society we want to leave our children. Pillars of wisdom symbolize in Western culture and early architect mirror the Egyptian temple, pillars of pantheon. So there's so much more that we can talk about there. But again, when you talk about specifics, you're talking about them in such a way that if the application is done right, each pillar gets stronger, and you have now a stronger structure. Of course, the cornerstone for those of us who believe in, which I firmly do, is Christ. Other ancient understandings, the cornerstone was always wisdom, Sophia, or gnosko, knowledge. But the call, as it was so long ago, is still above us. Who will go for us? Well, where do you want us to go? Into society and be the mouthpiece of God, be the mirror. So every now and then there comes a point where there needs to be an adjustment and a correction. The prophet in the Old Testament, his ministry is to the priest king. The fruit should always be tasted by the people. But his goal is to be the mouthpiece, the word prophet. So the three pillars, prophet, priest, the king, those are, you can say, the three offices. But they're the three pillars. And the Messiah is destined to walk in perfection in all three offices. The messianic prophecies about a future, a theocratic future where God is king. But the Messiah was the embodiment, the perfect embodiment of the priest, that's religion, the king, government of the society, and prophet represents as the mouthpiece of God the call to theocracy, the call to walk in harmony with God as we walk in harmony with our brothers and sisters. And so a society is judged by the strength of its institutions. How strong are our institutions? Well, how deep is the suffering among the people? And so even in the story of the transfiguration, think about that. Peter says, I want to build a tabernacle and stay here. Feels good here. Let's rule from here. However, the theocratic society, God must be incarnate in and with the people in order for there to be a good society. The disciples are trying to cast out a demon as they return. As soon as they return, the reality of the weakening of the institutions, protecting the children. Man brings his child is throwing himself into the fire, which is not necessarily a bad thing because um, we all know the Bible talks about God coming to baptize by fire. So in some cases, being thrown into the fire is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to see God in ways in which we never has. But here, this young man is throwing himself in the fire in ways that are detrimental. And so what Jesus said on the Mount of Transfiguration and rebuking Peter, now we understand why. We understand why now. You have to take the religious experience back into society, transform the culture. Be ye not conformed to the world, be ye transformed.